A whisper can hide a deadly truth. Are you ready to uncover it? Welcome to Shadow Deduction. I am your host, Cluecraft. Comment below where you're listening from. I love seeing our mystery family grow. Let's unravel this case. There are certain houses in England which seem designed not for living, but for the graceful concealment of secrets. Rosebank Court was one of them. It stood a little apart from the village of Chatham Vale, half hidden behind yews clipped into dark and solemn walls, its long windows reflecting the pale silver of a November afternoon. The house was neither ancient enough to be grand in the feudal manner, nor modern enough to possess comfort without apology. It had, instead, that most dangerous of all qualities in a country house, distinction. It suggested lineage, discretion, and in the sort of polished hospitality beneath which family resentments may be cultivated for years like rare orchids. On the evening in question, Rosebank Court was full. Lady Margaret Vane, its mistress, had gathered a small company for what her invitations had described as a musical weekend of the most intimate kind. That such a phrase might mean almost anything was generally understood by those who knew Lady Margaret. Music, in her vocabulary, served equally well as entertainment, diplomacy, and camouflage. There were 8 guests in all, not counting the secretary, the butler, and the reduced household staff proper to the season. They had arrived in 2s and 3s through the damp autumn day. A diplomat recently returned from Vienna. A widowed beauty whose income was the subject of eager speculation, like a young man with excellent shoulders and no profession. A discreet doctor, an elderly gentleman with a ribbon in his buttonhole and a tendency to fall asleep after dinner. A celebrated contralto, and Mr. Adrian Bell, a financier whose name had appeared in the newspapers often enough to suggest both success and enemies. It was Mr. Bell who died. Yet, if one were to be exact, and Hercule Poirot would always insist upon exactness, it might be said that the affair began not with his death, but with a whisper. The Blue Salon at Rosebank Court was so called because every object within it, from the faded Aubusson chairs to the Chinese vases upon the mantelpiece, belonged to some deliberate variation of blue. In daylight, it possessed charm; by lamplight, mystery. After dinner, when the ladies had rejoined the gentlemen and coffee had been served upon little gilt tables, the room acquired that deceptive air of civilized ease in which cruel things may happen almost invisibly. Rain tapped now and then against the window panes. The logs in the fireplace had settled into a red, breathing glow. Madame Elise Vernier, the contralto, sat at the piano and let her fingers stray idly over a phrase from Gluck. Sir Alistair Brooke, the diplomat, stood with one elbow on the mantel and spoke in low tones to Lady Margaret. Dr. Francis Lorimer, neat and grave, was engaged in a discussion about sleeping draughts with Miss Cynthia Vale, Lady Margaret's companion secretary. Captain Rupert Ashby had installed himself near Madame Vernier and was smiling in the manner of a man who considered smiling one of his chief accomplishments. Mrs. Lydia Harcourt, exquisitely dressed in black satin and pearls, watched everybody and appeared to be watching no one. Mr. Bell stood somewhat apart, his broad figure outlined against the far end of the room, a coffee cup in one hand and a look of impatience in his face. The conversation, for those who noticed such things, had become strained. It was not that anyone had said too much. In houses such as Rosebank Court, people rarely did. It was rather that several persons had said just too little and with too much care. Lady Margaret was in the middle of an anecdote concerning a Hungarian violinist when Mr. Bell interrupted her. "I wonder," he said, in a voice perfectly civil and perfectly timed to silence the room, "sir, whether private conversation might be possible in this house without half the company supposing itself under observation." There was a pause. Lady Margaret, who possessed social courage of a seasoned kind, gave a little laugh. "My dear Adrian, at Rosebank everyone is observed. It is part of the attraction." A few people smiled. Mr. Bell did not. "It may become part of the danger," he said. If he had left the remark there, it might have passed into the small archive of uncomfortable sayings later recalled with unnecessary significance. But at that precise moment, something occurred, which 2 people afterward remembered clearly, 3 others imperfectly, and 1 person denied altogether. A woman's voice whispered, "You fool, must you say it tonight?" The words were very low. They came, it seemed, from the shadowed corner near the ormolu cabinet, where the light from the nearest lamp did not fully reach. Yet because the room had fallen so suddenly quiet, the whisper carried. Mr. Bell turned at once. His face changed. Not dramatically, not enough for the inattentive observer, but those who were looking at him saw in an instant first recognition, then anger, and then something else, something far more disquieting. Fear. He set down his coffee cup with a sharp little click upon the table beside him. "Indeed," he said. No one answered. Madame Vernier's hands had gone still above the keys. Captain Ashby straightened. Sir Alister's expression became bland to the point of vacancy, which with diplomats is often a sign of close attention. Miss Vale lowered her eyes to the papers she had no reason to be carrying at that hour. "Mrs. Harcourt lifted her lorgnette, though there was no practical need for it. Lady Margaret said lightly, "Really, you all behave like characters in a French play. Someone must sing or confess or ring for more coffee." Mr. Bell looked across the room. It was impossible afterward to say whom he looked at. That uncertainty, trivial as it seemed, would matter later. Then he bowed slightly, more to the room than to any person in it. "I think," he said, "I shall retire early." Again, the sentence was ordinary enough. Men retired early every day in England for reasons of fatigue, indigestion, boredom, or bridge. But his tone was not ordinary. It was the tone of a man ending something inwardly. He crossed the room, paused near Lady Margaret as though to speak, thought better of it, and left by the door leading to the east corridor. The door closed. A conversation resumed, but with the forced brightness of a fire that has been poked and stirred without increasing its warmth. Lady Margaret insisted that Madame Vernier sing. Madame Vernier, after a moment's hesitation, obeyed. Her voice rose rich and sombre in the blue room, and if several people were not listening, it was because each had turned inward to private calculations. At 10:30, Sir Alister asked for cigarettes and was told by Bates, the butler, that the silver cigarette box had last been seen in the morning room. Captain Ashby volunteered to fetch it, declared the morning room dark as a cellar, and returned empty-handed but with a story about nearly breaking his neck over a footstool. Dr. Lorimer laughed. Mrs. Harcourt did not. Miss Vale excused herself with a headache. Lady Margaret rang for more coal. The routine of civilized life dragged itself on. It was nearly 11 when the house was disturbed. Bates, imperturbable for 22 years in the service of the Vane family, entered the blue salon not with his usual noiseless efficiency, but with a face so altered that Lady Margaret stood up at once. "What is it, Bates?" The butler swallowed. "I beg your pardon, my lady. Mr. Bell has had an accident in the library." "An accident?" repeated Dr. Lorimer sharply. "I found him, sir. He is—" Bates faltered on the last word, as if the discipline of his profession recoiled from it. "He is dead." No one moved at first. The statement, absurd in its directness, seemed incapable of attaching itself to the warm room, the lamplight, the half-finished coffee cups, the fold of music still open upon the piano. Then Madame Vernier gave a small and involuntary cry. Captain Ashby swore softly. Miss Vale, who had not in fact gone very far but was standing just beyond the doorway, caught hold of the frame with one hand. Lady Margaret spoke first. "How?" "In his chair, my lady, by the writing table. I thought at first he had fallen asleep. Then I saw." Bates stopped again. Dr. Lorimer was already at the door. "Come," he said curtly. They went together. Lady Margaret, Sir Alister, Captain Ashby, Mrs. Harcourt, Miss Vale, and behind them Madame Vernier, one hand pressed to her throat. The library lay across the east hall, a dark, masculine room with green-shaded lamps, rows of calf-bound books, and a marble bust of Minerva that had always seemed to Lady Margaret rather too severe for domestic use. Mr. Adrian Bell sat in a leather chair near the fire. His head had fallen slightly to one side. His eyes were half open. On the carpet beside him lay a shattered glass. One hand was clenched upon the armrest, the other hung lax. At his feet, just visible beneath the edge of the chair, was a scrap of crumpled paper. Dr. Lorimer bent over him, touched the wrist, then the throat, and finally straightened. "He has been dead some minutes," he said. "Heart failure?" asked Sir Alister quietly. Dr. Lorimer's face was unreadable. "No." He looked down at the dead man, then at the broken glass, then at the faces gathered in the library doorway. "No," he repeated. "I should say not heart failure." Outside, the rain beat more sharply against the long windows. Inside the room, no one spoke. For in that instant, before the police were sent for, before accusations, before explanations, before the first lie was told with deliberation, each person present understood the same dreadful thing. Adrian Bell had not died naturally, and somewhere, among those who had heard the whisper in the blue salon, was the person who knew why. Dr. Lorimer's words did not fall into silence so much as settle upon it, like dust upon polished wood, visible only when one dared to look closely. Lady Margaret was the first to recover her composure, though her voice bore a faint, controlled sharpness. "We must send for the police at once." "Yes," said Sir Alister Brooke quietly. "At once." Bates inclined his head. "I've already telephoned the village, my lady. Inspector Japp is expected from the county within the hour." "Japp," repeated Captain Ashby. "That fellow from London. What's he doing down here?" Sir Alister's mouth curved faintly. "Some on leave, I believe. Fortune, perhaps." Dr. Lorimer knelt again beside the body. His fingers moved with professional care, though there was something in his expression that suggested not merely examination, but calculation. "No visible wound," he murmured. "But the glass—" All eyes followed his glance. The broken tumbler lay in glittering fragments upon the carpet, the faint scent of something bitter, almond-like, but elusive, hovering just perceptibly in the air. Mrs. Harcourt spoke suddenly, her voice low and precise. "Poison." No one contradicted her. Miss Vale gave a small gasp. "But that is impossible. We were all together. He only left us—" "Precisely," said Sir Alister, "which makes it extremely possible." Captain Ashby shifted his weight uneasily. "Look here, this is absurd. Bell must have taken something himself. A sleeping draught, perhaps. Men of his sort, high-strung." Dr. Lorimer shook his head. "No, not like this, and not so quickly." Lady Margaret turned to Bates. "No one is to leave the house. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lady." "And no one is to touch anything in this room." "Very good, my lady." Bates withdrew with quiet efficiency, closing the door behind him. For a moment they remained as they were, a small group gathered around a dead man, each acutely conscious of the others. It was Mrs. Harcourt who broke the stillness. "How long," she asked, "has he been dead?" Dr. Lorimer considered. 10 minutes, perhaps 15. Miss Vale pressed her hand to her lips. "Then it must have happened almost immediately after he left us." "Yes," said Sir Alister, "almost immediately." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. And who had seen him last? Who had followed him? Or, more chilling still, what had already been waiting for him in this room? Captain Ashby ran a hand through his hair. This is damned unpleasant. I suppose we shall all be questioned." "Undoubtedly," said Mrs. Harcourt. Her tone was calm, but her eyes moved from face to face with quiet intensity. Lady Margaret drew herself up. "We shall conduct ourselves," she said, "with dignity. There will be no hysteria, no speculation, and certainly no accusations. We owe that, at least, to our guest." There was a murmur of assent. Yet beneath that agreement lay something else, something colder. Each person in that room had heard the whisper. Each had seen Belle's reaction, and each, in their own way, was already wondering the same thing. Who had spoken? Sir Alister turned slightly toward Lady Margaret. My dear Margaret, you will forgive me, but there is one matter which cannot wait for Inspector Japp." "Yes?" "The servants. They must be accounted for." Lady Margaret nodded. "Bates will see to it." "Even so," Sir Alister continued, "it would be wise to establish who has had access to this room and to Mr. Bell since dinner." Dr. Lorimer rose. "A sensible precaution." Miss Vale spoke hesitantly. I passed through the hall about 10 minutes ago. I thought I heard someone moving in here, but I did not look in." "Why not?" asked Mrs. Harcourt. I assumed it was Mr. Bell." "Did you hear anything else?" Sir Alister asked. Miss Vale shook her head. "No, only the sound of glass, perhaps. I cannot be certain." Captain Ashby gave a short laugh, too loud for the room. "There you are." He dropped his glass, frightened himself into a seizure, and that's the end of it. "No," said Dr. Lorimer quietly. "It is not the end of it." His gaze rested on the small crumpled paper near the chair. "Has anyone touched that?" "No," said Lady Margaret. "Then perhaps we should not." But they all looked at it. A trivial thing, a scrap no larger than a visiting card. Yet in that moment it seemed to possess an importance wholly disproportionate to its size. Sir Alister spoke softly. "Curious." Mrs. Harcourt tilted her head. "Very." Captain Ashby shrugged. "Probably nothing." But no one believed him. From somewhere in the house came the distant sound of a door closing. The ordinary noises of life continued, indifferent to the drama unfolding within these walls. Lady Margaret turned abruptly. "We cannot remain here indefinitely. Doctor, there is nothing more you can do?" Dr. Lorimer hesitated. "No." "Then we must wait." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One thing more," she said without turning back. "Until the police arrive, we say nothing beyond what is absolutely necessary." Sir Alister inclined his head. "Naturally." Mrs. Harcourt smiled faintly. "Of course." Captain Ashby muttered something indistinct. Miss Vale said nothing at all. They began, slowly, to leave the room, but as they did so, each carried away not merely the image of the dead man in the chair, nor the faint, bitter scent in the air, nor even the glittering shards of the broken glass. They carried the whisper. "You fool! Must you say it tonight?" It echoed now with a new and terrible clarity. For it was no longer merely a warning, it was a prelude. The house settled into an uneasy stillness. In the blue salon the fire had burned low, and the piano stood silent, its lid half open like an unfinished thought. Coffee cups remained where they had been set down, forgotten. The music lay untouched, and in that room, where the whisper had first been heard, something else lingered. Not a sound, not a presence, but a tension, as though the truth itself had paused there, waiting for someone to understand it, waiting for Hercule Poirot. Inspector Japp arrived at Rosebank Court just before midnight, bringing with him the damp chill of the outside world and the brisk authority of a man accustomed to unpleasant facts. He listened first. It was his method, practical, efficient, and in marked contrast to that of his more celebrated acquaintance. Standing in the library doorway, hat still in hand, he took in the arrangement of the room, the position of the body, the broken glass, to in the faces of those present with a quick, comprehensive glance that missed very little. "Well," he said at last, "this is a nasty business." Dr. Lorimer gave a short nod. "Poison, in my opinion." Japp stepped forward, crouching beside the chair. He sniffed the air, then the rim of one of the glass fragments, his expression sharpening slightly. "Cyanide, I'd say. Quick and tidy." Miss Vale shuddered. Captain Ashby looked away. "Who found him?" Japp asked. "I did, sir," said Bates from the doorway. "Time?" "A little before 11, sir." Japp rose. "And he was last seen alive?" There was a brief hesitation. "In the blue salon," said Lady Margaret. "At approximately 10:30. Japp's eyes moved over the group. "All together, were you?" "Yes," said Sir Alister. "All of us." "Until Mr. Bell left the room," added Mrs. Harcourt softly. The Japp nodded. "And after that?" No one answered at once. Come," said Japp, not unkindly. "We shall have to be precise." Miss Vale spoke first. I left shortly after. I had a headache." "And you?" Japp turned to Captain Ashby. "I stayed in the salon. We all did. Except Bell, of course." "Anyone follow him?" A pause. "No," said Lady Margaret firmly. Japp glanced at her, then at the others. "Anyone see him again before he was found?" Miss Vale hesitated. "I passed the hall. I thought I heard someone in here, but I didn't look." Japp straightened, dusting his hands lightly together. "So we have a man leaves the room, comes in here, gets himself poisoned within, what, 10 minutes? Less? And no one sees anything." He looked again at the broken glass. "Where did the drink come from?" Bates answered at once. "From the tray in the blue salon, sir. Coffee and liqueurs were served there." "Did Mr. Bell bring a glass with him when he left?" There was another pause. Longer this time. "I believe he did," said Sir Alister. "Believe, sir, or no?" "I saw something in his hand. A glass, I think." Japp grunted. "And no one else left the room in that time?" "No," said Lady Margaret again, a shade too quickly. Japp's eyes flickered, but he did not press the point. Instead, he turned his attention to the small crumpled paper near the chair. "What's this?" "No one has touched it," said Dr. Lorimer. "Good." Japp bent, picked it up carefully between thumb and forefinger, and smoothed it out. For a moment he said nothing. Then he gave a short, sharp whistle. "Well now." "What is it?" asked Sir Alister. Japp held the paper up, but not so that they could read it. "A note," he said, short and to the point. Mrs. Harcourt's voice was very quiet. "What does it say?" Japp glanced at her, then at the others. "It says, at 11, the library. It must be settled tonight." No one spoke. The words seemed to hang in the air, stark and undeniable. "It must be settled tonight," repeated Japp. "Looks to me like your Mr. Bell had an appointment." "With whom?" murmured Captain Ashby. "That," said Japp, folding the paper again, "is what we're going to find out." He slipped it into an envelope. "Now then," he continued briskly, "I'll want statements from all of you, one at a time. No conferring." Lady Margaret inclined her head. "Of course." "And before we begin," Japp added, "there's one more thing." He paused, letting his gaze move deliberately from face to face. "I understand," he said, "there was some sort of remark made before Mr. Bell left the salon." The effect was immediate. Miss Vale looked down. Captain Ashby shifted again. Sir Alister became very still. Mrs. Harcourt's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. Lady Margaret's lips pressed together almost imperceptibly. "What remark?" she asked. Japp smiled faintly. "A whisper, I'm told." Silence. "Well?" he prompted. Miss Vale spoke, barely above a breath. "Someone said, 'You fool, must you say it tonight?'" And who said that? I don't know. Jap nodded slowly. No, I expect you don't. He looked around the room once more. But someone does. His tone was matter-of-fact, but the implication was clear enough. Someone in that house had spoken the words. Someone in that house had arranged the meeting, and someone in that house had ensured that Adrian Bell would not leave the library alive. Jap moved toward the door. Right, he said. We'll begin in the morning room. Lady Margaret, if you please. As she passed him, composed and dignified, he added quietly, Oh, and one more thing, my lady. She paused. I've sent a message to London. Thought it might interest a certain gentleman. Lady Margaret turned slightly. Indeed? Yes, said Jap. Might be just the sort of puzzle he enjoys. For the first time that night, something like unease. Not grief, not shock, but something sharper. Touched her expression. Hercule Poirot, she said. Jap nodded. That's the one. And somewhere, far from Rosebank Court, the little grey cells had already begun to stir. The morning room, usually reserved for letters and quiet industry, took on a different character under Inspector Jap's direction. The curtains were drawn back, though the day beyond remained grey and reluctant. A small writing table had been cleared. A single chair stood opposite it. The arrangement was simple, almost austere, designed perhaps to encourage truth or at least discourage invention. Lady Margaret was the first to be called. She entered with composure, though there was about her a certain rigidity, as of one who has determined in advance exactly how much she will concede. Jap gestured to the chair. Thank you, my lady. We shan't keep you longer than necessary. I trust not, she said, sitting down. This is a most distressing situation. No doubt. Jap seated himself opposite, notebook in hand. Let us begin with the evening. You dined at 8. Yes. And afterward. There's coffee in the blue salon. Yes. All present? Yes. Jap's pencil moved. Now, Mr. Bell, you knew him well. Socially. Only socially. Lady Margaret met his gaze. I have no financial dealings, Inspector, if that is what you imply. Jap gave a non-committal grunt. And his manner this evening? A little abrupt, not unusual for him. He made a remark before leaving the room. Yes. Did you attach any particular significance to it? At the time? None. And the whisper. Lady Margaret hesitated, only for a fraction of a second. I heard it, she said, but I could not say who spoke. Man or woman? A woman. Certain? Yes. Jap tapped his pencil lightly. Yet you did not react. I saw no reason to create a scene. No, said Jap. Quite. He closed his notebook. That will do for now, my lady. Lady Margaret rose, now inclined her head, and left. Sir Alistair Brooke followed. His manner was smooth, untroubled. Too smooth, perhaps, for a man in such circumstances. You are a diplomat, Sir Alistair. I was. And now? Now I observe, Inspector. Jap allowed himself a faint smile. Then perhaps you observed something useful last night. Perhaps. Jap waited. Sir Alistair's gaze drifted momentarily to the window. Mr. Bell, he said at last, was not a man who feared easily. Yet when he heard that whisper, he was afraid. In your opinion? In my experience. Jap made a note. And the whisper itself? A woman's voice. Soft. Urgent. Recognizable. Sir Alistair paused. No. Not even a suspicion? Inspector, said Sir Alistair mildly. In my profession, one learns the value of uncertainty. Jap studied him for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I dare say you do. Captain Ashby was less composed. This is ridiculous, he said almost at once, dropping into the chair. You can't seriously think one of us. I don't think anything yet, said Jap calmly. I ask questions. Well, I've nothing to tell you. Let us see. Japp flipped a page. You remained in the blue salon after Mr. Bell left? Yes. The whole time? Yes. Did anyone else leave? No. Japp looked up. You are certain? Of course I am. Miss Vale says she left. Ashby frowned. Oh, well, yes. She slipped out. I didn't notice exactly when. But you noticed she had gone. Eventually. Japp's pencil paused. And Mrs. Harcourt? Ashby hesitated. She was there. All the time? I suppose so. You suppose? Ashby shifted. Look here, Inspector. I wasn't keeping watch on everyone. No, said Japp. Ah, that is quite clear. Mrs. Harcourt came next. She took the chair with quiet elegance, folding her hands in her lap. You wish to know what I observed, she said. That would be helpful. Very well. Mr. Bell was uneasy. Sir Alistair was attentive. Captain Ashby was bored. Miss Vale was nervous. Lady Margaret was determined to maintain control. Japp raised an eyebrow. You miss little, Mrs. Harcourt. One tries not to. And the whisper. She met his gaze directly. I heard it. Do you know who spoke? A pause. I might, she said. Japp leaned forward slightly. Might. Yes. And will you tell me? Mrs. Harcourt smiled faintly. No. Japp sat back. Why not? Because, she said calmly, I'm not yet certain. For the first time, something like irritation flickered across Japp's face. This isn't a drawing-room game, madam. No, she said. It is not. There was a brief silence. Then Japp closed his notebook with a snap. Very well. We shall return to that. Dr. Lorimer's statement was precise, clinical, and of limited use. Miss Vale's was halting, anxious, and full of small uncertainties. Madame Vernier spoke little English and less willingly. Bates, when questioned, remained impeccably correct and entirely uninformative. At last, the questioning paused. Japp stood in the center of the morning room, his hands behind his back, his brow furrowed. It did not add up. Too many small gaps, too many hesitations, too many people who had seen and not seen. The whisper, the note, the glass. Each piece lay before him, but they did not yet form a pattern. A knock came at the door. Yes? Bates entered. A gentleman has arrived, sir. Japp turned. Say name. Hercule Poirot, sir. Japp exhaled slowly. Ah, he said. Now we may get somewhere. And in that moment, as though the very air of the house adjusted itself in anticipation, the balance of the affair shifted. For where Inspector Japp sought facts, Hercule Poirot would seek truth. And the two are not always the same. Hercule Poirot entered the morning room with the air of a man who had not hurried, and yet had arrived precisely at the correct moment. He paused just inside the doorway, removing his gloves with delicate care, his eyes moving not quickly, but completely, taking in the arrangement of the room, the position of Inspector Japp, the expressions of those present. His gaze rested for a fraction longer than necessary on each face, as though committing them not merely to memory, but to understanding. My dear Japp, he said, inclining his head, you have sent for me. That is already most interesting. Japp gave a half smile. Morning, Poirot. Sorry to drag you down here, but we've got something a bit out of the ordinary. Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. Murder, I think, is always out of the ordinary. That is why it interests me. Lady Margaret stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, we are grateful for your assistance. This is a most unfortunate... Poirot raised a hand gently. Madame, when there is death, it is always unfortunate, but we shall see if it is also instructive. There was something in his tone, not unkind, but exact, that caused her to fall silent. Japp gestured toward the door. Come and have a look. They crossed to the library together. Poirot entered slowly. He did not go at once to the body. Instead, he stood just within the threshold. his head slightly inclined, as though listening, not to sound, but to the echo of events that had already passed. "Ah," he murmured. Japp watched him. "Well?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He moved forward, his steps small and precise, and came at last to the chair where Adrian Bell sat. He regarded the dead man with a grave courtesy. "A man of force," he said softly, "and of impatience." Japp nodded. "That's about the size of him." Poirot bent slightly, examining the position of the hands, the angle of the head. Then his gaze shifted to the carpet. "The glass," he said. "Yes. Cyanide, most likely." Poirot crouched, studying the fragments without touching them. "It was dropped," he observed, "not thrown." "Agreed." Poirot straightened and turned slowly, taking in the room, the writing table, the chairs, the mantel, the door. "And tell me," he said, "this room? It was not used this evening before the death?" "No," said Japp. "All in the blue salon." Poirot nodded. "Then we have here a place prepared, or at least anticipated." Japp frowned slightly. "Prepared? There's no sign of that." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not for the eyes, perhaps." He moved to the writing table. "Ah," he said again. The single syllable was different this time. Quieter, but sharper. Japp stepped closer. "What is it?" Poirot did not answer at once. His finger hovered just above the surface of the polished wood. "There has been something here," he said. Something?" "A paper, larger than the one you have found." Japp stared. "How do you know that?" Poirot glanced at him, almost reproachfully. "My friend, one sees the faint mark, the impression, where the dust is disturbed. It is very neat, very symmetrical. It pleases me." Japp leaned in, squinting. "I'll be damned." Poirot straightened. "It has been removed. Before you arrived, I think." Japp's expression hardened. "Then someone came in here after Bell, and before Bates found him." "Possibly," said Poirot. "Or someone anticipated that you would come, and took precautions." He turned toward the small envelope in Japp's hand. "The note, if you please." Japp handed it over. Poirot opened it carefully, smoothing the paper with almost affectionate precision. His eyes moved across the words. "At 11, the library. It must be settled tonight." He nodded slowly. "Yes, it is, I thought." "What do you make of it?" Japp asked. Poirot looked up. "I make of it," he said, "that Monsieur Bell expected a meeting, that he feared it, and yet could not avoid it, and that the matter to be settled was of importance, perhaps of danger." Japp folded his arms. "That much is plain enough." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Ah, but there is more." "Yes?" Poirot held up the paper. "This note. It is written with great care. The hand is disguised, but not perfectly. There is a firmness, an insistence. It is not the hand of a nervous person." "Man or woman?" Japp asked. Poirot tilted his head. "A woman, I think." Japp let out a low whistle. "Same as the whisper." "Precisely." Poirot folded the paper again and returned it. "Now," he said, "we must consider the time." 10:30. He leaves the salon. Dead by 11, said Japp. "Just so. Very narrow window." "And no one admits to following him?" Poirot smiled gently. "No one ever does at first." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Before we speak with the others," he said, "there is one thing more." Japp waited. Poirot looked back at the chair, at the glass, at the quiet, ordered room. "The poison? It was in the drink, yes?" "Yes." "Then we must ask, who prepared the drink, and when?" Japp nodded slowly. "And who knew he would come here?" Poirot inclined his head. "Exactly." He opened the door. "Come, my friend, let us return to our suspects. Already they begin to arrange themselves." Japp followed him. Arrange themselves how? Poirot smiled, like the pieces of a puzzle, each in its place, though not yet in its truth. And as they stepped back into the morning room, where the others waited in strained anticipation, it became clear that the game had changed. For now, it was no longer merely a question of who had the opportunity. It was a question of who had understood Adrian Bell well enough to know that a whisper would send him to his death. The day had drawn toward its close when Hercule Poirot made his request. It was delivered with his usual courtesy, yet with a firmness that admitted no refusal. "I should be obliged," he said, "if everyone would assemble once more in the blue salon." There was a perceptible stir, unease, reluctance, curiosity, but Lady Margaret, pale yet composed, gave the necessary instruction. One by one, they returned to the room where it had begun, the fading fire, the silent piano, the blue shadows gathering once more as evening settled. Inspector Japp stood a little apart. He had the look of a man prepared to be either impressed or irritated. Poirot remained standing. He glanced around the room, ensuring all were present. Lady Margaret, Sir Alister, Captain Ashby, Mrs. Harcourt, Miss Vale, Dr. Lorimer, and Madame Vernier. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "we are here because of a death that was not natural, a death that was arranged, with care, with intelligence, and with an understanding of human nature." He paused. "Let us begin, not with the poison nor the note, but with the whisper." A ripple passed through the room. "You remember it well." "You fool, must you say it tonight?" A warning. "Yes, but also something more. It tells us two things." He raised one finger. "First, that Monsieur Bell intended to say something dangerous to someone in this room. A second finger. And second, that the person who spoke feared that he would do so." Sir Alister said quietly, "That much we already knew." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, but we did not yet understand its importance." He began to walk slowly. Monsieur Bell was summoned to the library, a note carefully written, disguised, but not entirely. A woman's hand, I think. He goes, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps angrily. He takes with him a drink. Poirot stopped. "And he dies." Silence. "The poison is in the drink, that is clear. But who placed it there? And when?" Captain Ashby shifted. "That's what we'd all like to know." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui, and yet the answer is most simple." He turned suddenly. "The drink was poisoned before Monsieur Bell left the blue salon." A sharp intake of breath from Miss Vale. "That's impossible," said Ashby. "We were all there." "Exactly," said Poirot gently. "All there." He looked toward the small tables. Coffee and liqueurs were served. Glasses were taken, set down, so exchanged. In such a moment, so ordinary, so unremarkable, it is easy, is it not, for one glass to become another? No one spoke. Poirot's gaze moved slowly across them. Who, then, had the opportunity? All of you, but opportunity is nothing without intention. He turned. Monsieur Bell was not merely uneasy. He was afraid. Why? Because he recognized the voice of the whisper. Miss Vale looked up suddenly. "Then he knew." "Yes," said Poirot softly. "He knew." He faced them all again. "And that is why he went to the library, not because of the note alone, but because he understood that the matter must indeed be settled." A pause. "Now we come to the second question. What was the matter?" Japp shifted slightly. "Blackmail, I'd say." Poirot nodded. "Très possible. Monsieur Bell was a man of finance. He knew things, dangerous things. And one among you had something to lose." His eyes rested at last on Mrs. Lydia Harcourt. She did not move. "You, madame," said Poirot quietly, "have observed much. You told Inspector Japp that you might know who spoke the whisper." Mrs. Harcourt smiled faintly. "I did." "And now?" Her gaze held his. Now I'm certain. Excellent, said Poirot. Then we are in agreement. A flicker, just a flicker, passed through her eyes. Captain Ashby frowned. What the devil? Poirot raised a hand. Mrs. Harcourt, he said, you spoke the whisper. A sharp murmur. Miss Vale gasped. Lady Margaret stiffened. Sir Alister's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Harcourt did not deny it. No, she said calmly. I did not wish him to speak. Because, said Poirot, he intended to expose you. Her smile did not change, but something behind it hardened. So he suspected, she said. He knew, said Poirot. Silence. And so, he continued, you wrote the note, you arranged the meeting, but you did not intend to argue. You intended to ensure his silence. Japp stepped forward. You poisoned the drink. No, said Poirot. All turned to him. No, he repeated gently. Madame Harcourt is too intelligent for that. To poison the drink in the salon would risk immediate suspicion. Japp frowned. Then who? Poirot turned slowly. Dr. Lorimer. The doctor started. That is absurd, he said sharply. Poirot regarded him kindly. You are a man of science. You understand poisons. You are also, how shall I say, closely connected to Mrs. Harcourt's affairs. A silence fell. Different now, heavier. Mrs. Harcourt's composure faltered, just for a moment. Poirot continued. You worked together, so she provided the motive. You provided the method. A small quantity, prepared in advance, introduced when the tray was arranged. A glass selected, not at random, but with care. Dr. Lorimer's face had gone pale. You cannot prove. Poirot raised a finger. The second paper, the one removed from the writing table, it bore your calculations, I think. Dosage, timing. You returned to retrieve it, but too late to erase all trace. Japp moved quickly. We'll find it. Dr. Lorimer said nothing. Poirot looked between them both. You see, he said softly, it was very clever, almost perfect, but you forgot one thing. Mrs. Harcourt's voice was barely audible. What? Poirot's eyes rested on her. The whisper. She closed her eyes. Yes, she said. That, said Poirot, was not part of the plan. It was emotion, and emotion always, it betrays. The room was still. Japp stepped forward. Dr. Lorimer, Mrs. Harcourt, I'll have to ask you to come with me. Dr. Lorimer did not resist. Mrs. Harcourt opened her eyes once more. For what it is worth, she said quietly. He deserved it. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps, he said, but that is not for you to decide. They were led away. The room seemed to breathe again. Lady Margaret sank into a chair. Miss Vale covered her face. Captain Ashby muttered something under his breath. Sir Alister stood very still. Japp turned back. Well, Poirot, he said, I'll hand it to you. Poirot smiled gently. It was the little things, my friend, always the little things. Later, as the house began slowly to return to its accustomed order, Poirot stood for a moment alone in the blue salon. The fire had been relit, though the piano remained silent. He adjusted a vase, just slightly until it stood exactly centered. Order, he murmured. It is what we seek. And yet, how often it is disturbed by the passions of the human heart. He glanced once more round the room. The whisper, he said softly. It begins everything. Then, with a small, satisfied nod, Hercule Poirot took his leave, leaving behind a house quieter, perhaps wiser, and a mystery resolved not by force, but by the quiet precision of the little grey cells.